There was a time in Britain when failing financially didn't ruin your credit score, it ruined your freedom. And once you were locked away for debt, it became almost impossible to escape. So how did owing money become a crime worthy of a prison cell? Let me introduce someone I'll return to throughout this story. He's not famous, he's not notorious, he's a small tradesman, the sort of man Britain once ran on. He buys materials on credit, sells what he can, pays when he's paid, until one winter he isn't. A customer defaults, another delays, rent still comes in, creditors lose patience. And one morning, instead of a demand letter, he receives something much worse, a writ. Within days, he's not behind a counter or at a workbench, he's behind bars. Not because he stole, not because he cheated, but because he couldn't pay. Why did the law treat financial failure as moral failure? To understand debtors' prisons, we need to understand how earlier Britain thought about money. Debt wasn't neutral, it wasn't abstract, it wasn't systemic, it was personal and deeply moral. If you owed money, it meant someone else had trusted you. If you failed to repay, you hadn't just miscalculated, you'd broken faith. And in a society built on personal credit rather than banks, that mattered enormously. There were no credit scores, no bankruptcy protections, no consumer safeguards, just reputation and the law. So when someone failed to pay, the assumption wasn't misfortune, it was fault. But what did prisons actually achieve? Debtors' prisons weren't designed to punish crime. They were designed to extract payment. The logic was brutally simple. If you had money hidden, prison would make you reveal it. If you had friends or family, prison would make them pay. If you had prospects, prison would force a settlement. And if none of that worked, you stayed. Some debtors remained in prison for years, some for life. And here's the cruel irony. Prisoners often had to pay for their own imprisonment, food, bedding, even the right to receive visitors. If you couldn't afford prison fees, conditions worsened. So poverty became self-reinforcing. How did ordinary people survive inside? Our tradesman isn't issued a release date. There's no fixed term. Debtors' prison was limbo. Some inmates ran small businesses from inside. Others relied entirely on family outside. A few lived with spouses and children inside the prison walls. Yes, whole families. This wasn't accidental. It was understood that confinement applied pressure not just to the debtor, but to everyone who depended on them. It turned private hardship into public leverage. And here's where the moral contradiction deepens. Debtors weren't criminals, but they were locked in the same spaces as criminals. They weren't dangerous, but they lost liberty all the same. So why did society accept this? Debtors' prisons didn't exist to protect the poor. They existed to protect creditors, particularly wealthy ones. Large landowners, merchants and institutions relied on enforceable debt to keep the economy running on their terms, and the law reflected that imbalance. If you were wealthy and owed money, you could negotiate, delay or restructure. If you were poor, you were far more likely to be imprisoned. Debt law wasn't neutral. It enforced hierarchy, and it sent a message. Failure wasn't a phase, it was a flaw. But when did people begin to question this? By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, cracks began to show. Reformers started asking uncomfortable questions. How does imprisoning someone help them earn money? Why punish failure in an economy that increasingly produced it? And who benefits when labour is removed from society? Our tradesman locked away isn't repaying anybody. He isn't producing. He isn't rebuilding. He's simply stuck. And as Britain industrialised, that inefficiency became impossible to ignore. Factories needed workers. Cities needed labour. Commerce needed circulation. Debtors' prison froze all three. So why didn't it end sooner? One reason debt imprisonment lingered was fear. Many believed that removing punishment would encourage irresponsibility. If debt carried no threat of imprisonment, what would stop people borrowing recklessly? This wasn't entirely cynical. It reflected a genuine anxiety in a society transitioning from personal obligation to impersonal systems. But it also revealed something deeper. The law wasn't just enforcing contracts, it was enforcing values. Work hard, pay your way, don't fail. And if you do, you'll disappear behind walls. This might be a good moment to pause. Do you think fear is ever an effective way to run an economy? Or does it simply hide risk until it explodes elsewhere? I'd genuinely love to know what you think. Feel free to put your thoughts in the comments. History doesn't give us neat answers, but it does give us warnings. The end didn't come suddenly. There was no single dramatic repeal. Instead, Britain backed away from debtor imprisonment step by step, almost apologetically. Exemptions appeared. Limits were imposed. Certain debts were excluded. And finally, in the mid-19th century, imprisonment for debt was largely abolished. Not because debt disappeared, but because society finally accepted something radical. Owing money wasn't the same as wrongdoing. Failure could be structural. Economic cycles could crush the diligent as easily as the reckless. This was a moral shift, not just a legal one. Debtors weren't suddenly free of consequence, but the tools changed. Bankruptcy law, asset restructuring, civil courts instead of cells. The goal shifted from punishment to resolution, from shame to solvency. And that tells us something important. Britain didn't become kinder, it became more practical. When Britain locked people away for debt, it wasn't cruel by accident. It was logical, according to the values of the time. Debt meant betrayal. Failure meant fault. Prison meant pressure. What changed wasn't human nature. It was how Britain understood risk, responsibility, and the economy itself. We stopped treating money as morality and started treating it as structure. And once that shift happened, the prison doors no longer made sense. Thanks for walking a little further down the path that made Britain with me. If you liked it, there's a button especially for that. And if you subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue of videos similar, like this one that YouTube's chosen. Have a look. I think you'll like it. So take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.